Hi everybody, it's Mariana again, filling in for Martin on another exciting episode of We're Still Here. So without further ado, here's what makes me happy. So for those of you who don't know, I have kind of a thing for robots. Robots are I have my sleeve here, sort of like a steampunk robot arm dealy. And then you got the Zeppelin, but that was just to save detailing because it hurt so much. I am very ashamed to admit that I love the Transformers movies. There you go. Here's some Michael Bay Bumblebee, just to offend your sensibilities. But I don't know what it is, but any movie involving robots automatically gets like a pass in my book. I struggle to think of a robot movie that I've seen that I haven't liked. And since I just saw Avengers Age of Ultron, I figured it might be fun to talk about not Avengers, but just robots in general and why robots are fucking awesome. I guess I started getting into I feel so silly because I haven't done a whole lot of research into robotics, but there is something to I'm not an engineer. I don't know the fine workings of robots or robotics or artificial intelligence or anything like that. So I guess you could say I'm a fake robot fangirl. I don't know. I'm not gonna run around and proclaim that I'm the world's leading expert on anything to do with robots, but I am the world's leading expert in watching robots, and I can talk about that. There's ever since I worked at Disneyland very briefly in the they have what's called the Innoventions building, which I'm sure in a few years will not be called that anymore. It'll probably be called Marvel's fill in the blank bullshit. I don't know. But anyway, at the moment it's called Innoventions, and at the time it was called Innoventions. And inside, you would go inside and there's all this hokey stuff that you look at. But one of the things that they had in there was the Osimo robot by Honda. And it was so cool. I think that was one of the first robots I saw in person. And, that I don't know, advanced robot, how about that? But I was just so enamored with this fucking robot because it was short and fat and it was very stocky. But the cool thing about it was I guess depending on your gender, men heard this robot as a woman, women heard this robot as a young boy. I heard it as a young boy. And it's one of the first robots that can run. The difference between walking and running is that walking always has one limb on the ground, whereas in running, there's a brief moment where both feet are off the ground at the same time. When we're talking about bipedal creatures anyway. But I was absolutely fascinated by this fucking thing because not only was it truly androgynous in that its voice could not be properly objectively interpreted by any one person as being gendered, but also I don't know, it was cool. And from there I think I started just getting more and more something awakened within me, a primal love of robots. And shortly after the Transformers movies came out, and I very guiltily admit to loving, okay, I don't love all of them, but I absolutely adore Optimus Prime. He's my husbando. If I were a giant robot, I would be all over that giant robot. He's just amazing. I also really enjoyed Iron Man. Obviously, a lot of people enjoyed Iron Man, and it was Marvel Studios' first production. It was the first thing I'd ever really intimately gotten to know from Marvel. I mean, I watched the X-Men cartoon and stuff like that, but we're not talking about Marvel exclusively. But I don't know. I couldn't I couldn't really like pinpoint why exactly I had this fascination with robots in general and stuff like that until I saw this movie called Hugo. And if you guys have seen Hugo, I don't remember how long ago it came out, but it's basically about like this kid who is orphaned in a train station and he's living in there. And it was a pretty unremarkable movie, and I'm struggling to remember most of it. But I do remember this one part that really stuck with me, that he said, essentially, he found comfort in machines, clocks, or anything with, working parts, because essentially, like, there's no such thing as an extra part. That as long as it was part of the machine, it did something to contribute to the overall functionality of what it was a part of. And he, in turn, would reflected that in his own like approach to the way that he saw life. Like, even though he didn't have any parents or whatever his situation was, even though he was, for all, like, in terms of, like, society's idea of what he was like, people, I'm sure, thought of him as unwanted because he was fucking living in a train station and being chased around by Sacha Baron Cohen and, all those hijinks. But ultimately, this kid had a will to live and, like, the desire to keep on going and doing what he was doing, because he knew that the fact that he was there justified his own existence. And I think there's something pretty profound in that. And obviously when it comes to robots or robotics or anything like that, I wouldn't say I apply robots to my life so deeply. It's a nice thing to keep in mind. But when it comes to robots and stuff like that, it's almost like watching some sort of like glorious fucking tornado of shit that comes together and then works, not always amazingly, because I would say obviously like 9 times out of 10 your robot's gonna fall down and explode or something, but the one time that it does work, all these parts that you've like somehow assembled by chance are like working harmoniously and perfectly, and it's just pandemonium inside of these things. And I don't know, maybe maybe I'm just attracted to organized chaos, I don't know, which given my husband is not entirely far-fetched. But I don't know. There's just something, maybe ever since I saw that movie, I kind of did internalize it, and I thought of robots as a more comforting or attractive presence, simply because they help remind us that like every little part counts. So in a way, even if you're just whoever's watching this video, you fucking count. To somebody you count. To somebody you're the part that they need in order to function. And obviously when it comes to Martin's example, we are each other's essential parts. I'm not going to say that, I'm the legs and he's the arms or whatever, or even just that we're 2 halves of a single body, because that's fucking corny as shit. But really, this whole metaphor is corny as shit. But either way, it's something to internalize and something to think about. Because if you weren't here, what would it do to someone else? In a robot's case, like, if it's learning how to walk, it'll just fall over, and then the scientist or the engineer will pick it back up and work on it some more until it functions properly. But what is that person going to do? We evolve and everything, but there's only so many times you can take that sort of hit. This got way more intense than I thought. let's talk about something lighter. I'm not gonna spoil Age of Ultron, but I just want to talk about it for a minute. No spoilers. I already said that. But you guys, I'm not super familiar with James Spader's body of work, alright? James Spader voice acted and mocapped Ultron in Age of Ultron. Not super familiar with his work. I know he's in like Boston Legal or something. I know he was in The Office because I watch The Office every day. Quite literally. Every day. And he was alright in that, but like the seasons were terrible. And I know he's supposed to be this sexual energy, like this guy who just exudes this odd aura of sexy ooze. I don't know if ooze can be sexy. But I didn't really get it until I saw Age of Ultron. And then he was a robot. And I was like, holy shit. I would bang that robot. I would bang James Spader, but only as a robot. And like, I'm having an emotional crisis right now because I just don't know what to do about all these James Spader feelings. Like, and there were so many of him. Like, in the movie, no like major spoilers or anything, but he just makes a bunch of himself. Pretty sure that was in the trailers. But he makes a bunch of himself, and he's like, yo bitches, I got a bajillion Ultrons. And I was like, this would be the most fantastic robot orgy. Same with like fucking like Optimus Prime. You can't tell me that if you were a giant robot that you would not bang Optimus Prime. Even if you were a dude robot, which technically those don't really exist. Like, technically they're all genderless. So you would have beautiful, not gendered sex with, I don't know. I don't even know what I don't know what I'm talking about. Either way, all I'm saying is robots are sexy. I have very awkwardly segueing into something that doesn't make me happy. I don't know if I have issues with like paranoia. I'm sure people would say that I do, but ultimately I am a rather paranoid person. Not in like a way that it affects my life fucking really adversely or anything. But it is something that is just hard to deal with, and I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way, especially a lot of women. But women especially can relate to kind of the paranoia that I kind of like go with on a day-to-day basis, and I'm sure some guys can too. But I don't know if it got better or worse ever since I was sexually assaulted or whatever, but I mean, it's always been there, and especially growing up as a girl or whatever, you're kind of like programmed to have things in the back of your mind always. And they've kind of touched on this on like Colbert Report and John Daly Show and stuff like that. But essentially, like, trying to think, like, it started, I remember the first thing I ever heard the first thing I was ever told that made me go like, why would I do that? Was somebody was telling me about how they went to, I was like 16 or 17, and somebody was telling me about how they went to a rave and how, and they were like, oh yeah, by the way, if you ever go to a rave, make sure you always keep your eye on your drink. And I was like, why? Why would somebody mess with my drink? And then they explained, you know, the whole idea of drugging somebody, and I don't even think they explained the possibility of being like sexually taken advantage of or anything like that. But I was just kind of like, it was kind of a strange aha moment. It was like the first time that I ever became aware of the fact that that other people could seriously hurt me for no reason. And obviously as you get older, it grows. And there are even situations that I wasn't even aware of until recently, because, I mean, like, Well, there's obviously people advise you to take extra turns if a car has followed you. If a car has followed you for more than a few turns, you don't want to reveal where you live, and or there's people who obviously you always have to keep your eye on your drink at parties and stuff like that. You don't want to walk alone after a certain time of night. Cross the street if you ever see somebody walking towards you. And there were also like a bunch of like cab tips, like if the cab driver locks the doors, get your phone out or something like that. I don't even know. I'm not even aware of that stuff because thankfully I don't take cabs very often, or I never have, because I grew up in the desert and they don't really exist there, or in the middle of nowhere and they don't really exist there. But yeah, like it's kind of like exhausting having to keep all of these things in mind, and then if you don't, like, people just kind of go, well, what did you expect? You didn't do XYZ. And it's like, well, the one time I didn't fucking keep this in mind, something happens. And granted, like, if I don't there are times where I'll drive home and sometimes like cars will have common turns with me, three or four turns that they have to do in addition to me, and sometimes I'm just kind of like, you know what, if they're gonna fucking beat me up and rob me in the parking lot, then I guess I don't even care. I'm just so tired. Just take my money and go. But I mean, and admittedly, something like that has never happened. Not watching my drink, unfortunately, something has happened with that. And that was one of the first times that I ever went out, and obviously didn't heed one person's advice, and it gets rough. I'm not the kind of person that lets that sort of paranoia govern over the entirety of my choices. And I'm not the kind of person that that lives my life based off of all of those warnings and stuff like that. Not even involving just assault and stuff like that, but any other fucking way that a human being can hurt another human being. But I know that there are people who do live with that, and I experience it in a million different minor ways too. Like, and I'm sure everyone else does, but sometimes it gets a little overwhelming with the, like, Martin left the door sort of not closed all the way one time, and now every time before I go to bed, or every time, like half the time when I'm on the verge of sleeping, I kind of like bolt up and I'm like, holy shit, the door is open, but it's not. Or all these little, I don't want to say OCD things because I'm not claiming to have OCD, but these little things that you don't remember in your mind's eye having done them, and they drive you crazy literally all day until you can go home and take care of them. It's really frustrating living life revolving around these little things that nag at you, and these little paranoias that have all of these, well, this could happen to you, or this will happen to you if you don't do this or that or whatever. And it's important to keep these things in mind, but to not obsess over them, and to not let them rule your life entirely. I wish I knew what to say in order to alleviate the sort of things in order to alleviate things that for people that may obsess about these sorts of things so much that they don't leave their house before doing like a ritual or a routine or something like that. Medication obviously helps a lot of people. Therapy obviously helps a lot of people. And in my case, it's not severe enough to where I would need that sort of thing. But don't be afraid to take those steps if you have to. Because while it's important to keep things in mind for your own safety, it's also important to not revolve your entire life around all the terrible what ifs that could happen to you if something happened in reaction to something that you didn't do. Because ultimately, while it may be easy for somebody on the outside to say, well, you didn't do this, so obviously you should have expected that to happen. In terms of locking your door, well, you didn't lock your door, so obviously someone fucking... So obviously someone was going to break into your house and steal your shit. Or, well, you wore that expensive watch and then walked through a dark alleyway, so obviously someone deserved to take it. Or, even worse, well, you were wearing that clothing, so you deserve to have somebody rip it off and take advantage of you, and yada yada. It's easy for somebody on the outside to say that, but ultimately, there's only so much you can do. There's only so many boxes you can check before it just gets exhausting. And no matter what, if somebody's going to steal from you, if somebody's going to hurt you, they will, no matter what you do. And maybe that's not so comforting. That didn't come off as comforting as I was hoping it to. But what I'm trying to say is you can't blame yourself for everything that happens. Somebody a year and a half ago or so, somebody broke into my car, and it was in my garage. Like, they came into the parking garage that we're in, and jimmied open the lock and stole a bunch of my shit. And thankfully, I didn't leave much of anything in my car, but it still happened. You know, like, even though I left nothing in my car, even though my doors were locked, even though I made sure to find a living situation where we had a secure area to keep all of our stuff, it still happened. So don't live in fear of that. Don't live in fear of something happening. Live in spite of the fact that it could happen. I hope that helped. So that's it on my end when it comes to things that are good and bad. I hope that the last week has been alright for you guys. I hope the next week will be alright for you guys. And just keep on trucking. Remember that you're someone's special part. And if you don't feel like you're someone's special part, then you should make someone your special part. I don't know. This is getting really corny. I'm not very good with corny. Just fucking make connections with people, bitches. That's how I do. Bye.